Everybody good? Good. Hey, so glad that you guys are here today. My name is Justin, one of the pastors here at Hope City. And before we dive into the message, what an incredible day for sports yesterday. I don't know if you're a sports fan or not, but we probably have some happy IU football fans. Even though they lost, they almost won. And so I was watching the IU game, and they got the onside kick with 34 seconds left, and they pan out, and there's 200 people in the audience. And I'm like, oh, everybody left, all right? And so then they go to the Purdue. I started watching the Purdue game. It's packed out, right? And any happy Boilermaker fans today? All right, a few. All right, good. Some of them are probably sleeping it off this morning. The actual, people who were at the game. But what an incredible day! And then, Game 7 of the National League playoffs for baseball, and then LeBron James's. I mean, it was just an incredible day of sports yesterday. And so I felt like I could not go to sleep last night because I was just so amped up with adrenaline watching all these games. And so glad to be here with you guys today. If you are a guest, we're extremely pleased that you're here with us. Honored that you spend part of your Sunday with us. And one of the things we say all the time is Hope City is a place where you can belong before you believe. And so no matter where you are spiritually this morning, we just hope that you feel at home. We hope that you feel welcome and that you feel like you're amongst friends. And so, we've been in this series the last couple weeks on this topic called generous. And really in the 2-year history of Hope City, we've not done a series on generosity, not done a series on giving. And so it's been as rich for me to be in this mode of learning more about generosity and being able to communicate better about generosity. I want to grow as a communicator. And so taking on this topic and really trying to put aside my own preconceived ideas of generosity and how I saw generosity play out in my own life as I was growing up in church, and really trying to come fresh and say, okay, what does God say about generosity, and how can we really live out God's purpose of being generous people? One of our core values is radical generosity. Well, if a church has a core value of radical generosity, that doesn't just come from the facility, right? That comes from the people who are a part of the church. And so how can we grow and become people who are radically generous? And so if you haven't been here the last few weeks, the first week we talked about how generosity really is God's plan to do good in this world. That we are instruments of God in this world, and as we become generous, right, we are able to help other people. And we talked about this idea of being rich in generosity so that we can allow people to experience God's love and God's grace. And it was kind of weird. I don't know if you were here 2 weeks ago. It felt kind of weird coming into the service because I've never experienced baptisms in the same Sunday as a generosity talk. And so I'm like, how is this going to work out? And it was like God's presence was just all over the whole deal because we got to see 6 people over the course of that morning be baptized. And one of the things that we're not about behavior modification, we're about life transformation. And so it was this mental and visible sign in real time of life change. That the generosity, the offering that we just received isn't about getting your dollars, it's about connecting our generosity to the hearts and the souls of people. Right? And so it was just an amazing moment at the end of each service to be able to say, oh, that's why we do what we do. So people can experience life transformation. We're not going through the motions here. We're not just playing church here. We're trying to experience life transformation. Then last week we talked about how not only does generosity help us help other people, allow us to help other people, but generosity can bring happiness to our life. That we talked last week about how our money tells a story. right? The money that you have in your life, it tells a story about you. Whether you realize that or not, but every single purchase that you make, every single appointment that you make on your calendar tells a story about you. Every single dollar that you spend tells a story about you. And we said that our money could tell a story of greed. If we view our money as just being self-serving, that our money is just all for us and we don't want to give it to anybody else, we don't want to use it for anybody else's benefit, then the story of our life will be one of greed, that we're just trying to accumulate and acquire as much as we possibly can, even though we can't take it with us, just so we can either feel better about ourselves or enjoy life and life to its fullest in our perception of what we should make this life about. The second story that life could tell about us is exhaustion, right? We talked about if we live above our means, if we have a certain amount of income, but yet we live as if we're going to make more, or if we actually spend more than we actually bring in, then we walk around exhausted. We live this life of exhaustion because we're constantly worried about not having enough. We're constantly worried about not being able to pay our bills or to be able to cover all of our expenses because we have actually spent more than we make. But the final story that we said last week is a story of happiness. That your money can tell a story of happiness as you go through life. And I outlined this principle that I really believe in. And there's been different seasons of life that Trish and I have been better at it than we better and worse at times. But this principle of 10, 10, 80. And we said, if you really want to live a happy life, give your first 10%, save the next 10%, and then live on 80%. And one of the things I did not say last week that I really wanted to say, and I feel like I have some credibility to say this because I'm a father of a 20-something, and I'm in my 40s now. And if you're in your 20s, the quicker you can get to that, the happier you're going to be. Right? Just as your pastor, and really, if you're in your 20s, kind of as a fatherly figure, which really makes me feel old. But if you can get to that place in your 20s, can I just say you're going to be so happy in your 30s? You're going to feel so generous in your 40s, and you're going to feel wealthy in your 50s and 60s. Like if you can figure out how you can give 10, save 10, and live on 80 in your 20s, your life is going to be so financially sound, right? No matter how much money you make or don't make, if you're living on 80% and you're doing that with the other 20%, there's a thing called compound interest, which I'm not really smart enough to talk to you about and explain to you, but that's a huge thing. And then there's also this thing that if you can learn to be generous in your 20s, God is going to use you in tremendous ways in your 30s and 40s. And so I really want, not that it doesn't apply to everybody, but if you're a college student or a high school student or in your 20s, I would just really encourage you to lean into that and really pray about how you can get to that point, because it's going to make a huge difference in your marriage later on in life. It's going to make a huge difference in how you raise your kids. It's going to make a huge difference in how you live your life financially. Well, today, I want to talk to you about not only does our money help us and our generosity help us help other people, not only does it help us experience happiness, but really our generosity, bottom line, it honors God. Like it brings honor to God. And honor is a word that we don't really use a lot in our culture. It's not really something that, we toss around a lot. But the word honor really means high esteem. It means to have great respect for. And when you and I are generous, it allows us to respect God. It allows us to demonstrate that we hold God in the highest esteem. And I know that maybe sounds weird. What does that really look like? As a pastor, I get to participate and be involved in some of the most intimate and some of the most crucial moments in a person's life. Over the last 20 years, I've done over 100 weddings. I've done 3 weddings this month. I'm doing another one next Sunday afternoon. And so I get to be a part of that moment. I get to be a part of this sacred moment where 2 people become one person. It's just an incredible opportunity. I haven't been a part of a lot of births, but I've been at the hospital after babies have been born. I've been a part of 3 births, okay? But being at the hospital when parents are getting to know their newborn child is just a really incredible thing. I've also had the opportunity to do several funerals. It's sobering to be invited into that moment, to be invited into the last moments a family has with the body of the person that they loved. Several years ago, actually probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I was asked by a lady in our church to do a funeral for her husband. They'd been married for 60 years. And I barely knew her. I was a part of a multi-campus church. Our campus ran about 1,200 people. The church was running about 5,000 people. So I barely knew her. She did attend our campus, but her husband didn't come. And she said, I know that he doesn't come to church. I think he loved God. I think he had a relationship with God. He was very private about his spirituality, but I would love for you to do his funeral. And I said, okay. And so part of that process is me getting to know this person that I've never met, to be able to not just copy and paste from a previous funeral that I've done, but actually make this moment not just memorable, but special for the family. And so I went over to the family's house and I sat down with them. And one of the things that the wife had said was, she's like, he wasn't an author. He wasn't famous. He was just a good man that loved his family. And so I needed to dig a little bit more and figure out a little bit more about him. And so I get to the house and I sit down and start talking to his wife and to his kids. And one of the first things I learned is that he was a veteran of World War II. He'd fought in World War II and was a veteran, and he was married to one woman for 60 years. After he got out of the Army, he worked at one place for over 30 years and retired from that location, that occupation. And so here, he was a father of 3. And so as they're telling me the story of this ordinary guy that wasn't famous and wasn't an author and wasn't a musician, even though we were in Nashville, and all of these things that would look more glamorous, it was very obvious as we went into this funeral that this guy was an American hero. Like, he was everything that most of us would aspire to be. To love your country enough to be willing to sacrifice your life for it. Even though he did not die in battle, he was willing to. To love one person enough to spend 60 years with them. To love your occupation, your job enough, or to at least be faithful enough to stay in that occupation for over 30 years and retire from that, that occupation. It was something that all of us probably, if you asked us to write the script of our life, we would all probably prefer that. And it was just this amazing moment. And so we wrapped up the funeral service at the funeral home, and we all get in our cars, and we drive to this place right outside of Nashville. About 12 miles west of the city, there's a place called the Middle Tennessee Veterans Cemetery. And as I came over the hill, this is the picture that I saw. This is actually a picture. I didn't take this picture. This is a picture off of their website of that location, of that cemetery. And it was the first time I had been in a military cemetery. I've been to Washington, D.C. I've never been to Arlington National Cemetery. And it was just overwhelming. I mean, not all these people died in battle, but all of these people, you had to be a veteran to be buried there. And it was just this overwhelming sense of, wow, all of these people were willing to sacrifice their life for my freedom. And so we do the graveside service. They fold up the flag. They give it to his wife, and we leave. And there was just this overwhelming sense of honor, right? There was this overwhelming sense of, I cannot believe that there are people right now sitting on walls and sitting in buildings and on secret missions that we'll never know anything about, willing to sacrifice everything so that you and I can worship this morning, so you and I can vote, so that you and I can experience the freedoms that we have in this world, in this country. And then I started thinking about God. And it was so easy for me to attribute honor to this man that I had never met, and rightfully so, right? We should honor those people. But then if you think about really God's role in our life, that God had such a desire to have a relationship with us, that he could not, there's a song that I love these days that says, you didn't want heaven without us, so you sent Jesus down. And so there's this aspect of God that he wanted to spend eternity with us, and so he sent his son to this world, not to just fight for our freedom, but to give his life up for us. To live a sinless life, to live a blameless life, and to take on every sin that you'll ever commit, every sin that you have committed, every sin that you ever will commit. Took it upon himself, became a sacrificial, atoning sacrifice for us. That he paid a price that we didn't have to pay so that we could live with him for all of eternity. And I thought as I was studying this week, like, why is it so hard to honor that? Why is it so easy to take that sacrifice for granted? The same way I really take the freedoms that we have for granted. And if you really want to get down to the bottom line of our generosity, generosity isn't about guilt, and it's not about shame, and it's not about obligation. It's about living with a daily awareness of God's love for you and his sacrifice for you, and the fact that his son was willing to give up everything for you. And so out of that, we're generous. But here's the truth about me, and I think probably the truth about you. I believe that to be true about Jesus, right? And I'm banking my entire eternity on it. It's part of what makes me a Christian. I'm banking my eternity on the truth that Jesus came to this world and sacrificed his life for my life. I trust in that. I believe in that. I've leveraged my entire life on sharing that news with everybody that I know. Everybody that comes to this church, everybody that comes in contact with me, that's what my life is about. And yet it's easier for us to trust Jesus and trust God with our eternity than it is our finances. Right? It's so easy for us to say, okay, I believe in that. I'm going to trust God for all of eternity, but I really don't know if he can provide for me next week. Right? Isn't that a broken part of us? Like, I just think that that's kind of whacked out, that how we can look to, the sin issue that we have and trust God to solve that, but yet we don't really know if God's really going to be trustworthy enough to provide for us if we're generous to him. And so here's the question I want you to wrestle with today. What does it look like for you, what does it look like for me, to honor God with our finances? What does it look like for me to honor God with my finances? That is different for every single person. You know why? Because the story of your life is different than the story of my life. Some of us have been given more, some of us have been given less, some of us have different challenges, some of us have different responsibilities. But when you are willing to ask that question, here's what you do. You open your life up, you open your heart up to be guided not by what you believe to be true about generosity, but what God says to be true about generosity. And here's been the theme of our series. We talked about these 4 levels of giving. We talked about, when somebody comes into a relationship with an organization, whether that be a nonprofit, whether that be a parachurch organization, whether that be a church, there's a level of what's called a rookie giver. Right? And a rookie giver is this person that gives for the very first time. And the question that the rookie giver is asking up until the moment that they decide to be generous is, do I trust this place? Do I like these people enough to give to this place? And this is a really crucial step in the life of a person who wants to be generous, because that first gift matters. Right? That first gift is a declaration of trust. It's saying, okay, I trust this organization, I trust this church, I trust this nonprofit, I trust this parachurch organization enough that I'm going to invest it, I'm going to give it. And so I don't want to take this for granted. This is a one-time gift, it's a sporadic gift. It's something that you either feel compelled to do or inspired to do. It's not something that you actually regularly do, but it's a huge step in the generosity process. And then as you get to grow with a group of people or in a church, you become what's called a reoccurring giver. And this is basically you in your mind saying, okay, I believe in the mission of this place. And not only do I believe in it, I want to be a part of the mission of this place advancing. And so the question that somebody asks at this stage of giving is, how much can I afford to give? Like, what does it look like? Okay, I'm going to add up my income, and I add up my expenses, and at the end of it, I'm going to determine how much I can afford to give comfortably or sacrificially or whatever that looks like for you. You decide, okay, this is how much I can afford to give. And this is a huge step because this is a prioritized aspect of your life. No longer are you sporadic. No longer are you just, okay, I'm going to drop a 20 in there whenever I feel like it. Now you're saying, okay, I want to be a part of the mission of this place, and so I'm going to prioritize giving in my life. There's another aspect that we talked about. This is what's called relational giving. And relational giving is somewhat similar to reoccurring because it is scheduled and it is planned and it is prioritized. But the motivation begins to shift at this stage of giving, because the question goes from how much can I afford to give to what does God ask me to give? What is God asking me personally to give? And many Christians, for as long as I can remember, have been taught that God asks us to give 10%. That's an Old Testament term. The tithe is an Old Testament term. It's actually a math term that literally just means 10%. And there's several instances in the Old Testament that talk about tithing and giving God 10%. We're going to look at a passage in a few minutes that talks about that in a different way. It uses a different term for it. But historically and biblically, there's this term that God says, okay, if you want to honor me with your finances, you would give the first 10%. And for some of us, that's a huge stretch. And as we're going to see in a moment, that's the point. Because giving at this level, it doesn't require how much can I afford, it requires, am I willing to trust? Am I willing to trust God? I'm willing to trust God beyond what I can see, beyond what I know, beyond what I'm comfortable with. And then finally, the last stage of giving is kind of builds on all of these. It's not in this silo. It's really an accumulation of all of these things adding up. It's what's called radical giving. And radical giving is saying, okay, I'm going to give what I feel like God's called me to give, but then I'm going to leverage my resources. I'm going to leverage my gifts. I'm going to leverage my talents and my time, and I'm going to give over and above that. And historically, we talked about this last week. The church has called this type of giving tithing, and then this type of giving is offering. And basically, that means over and above your regular giving. What does it look like to be a radical giver? Over and above what you've already determined to give based on maybe God's blessing in your life or promotion or a number of different life circumstances that could change that could prompt you to be a radical giver. And we did a spiritual gift class a couple weeks ago here at Hope City. I think we had 12 people that went through that class, and a couple of the people in that class had the spiritual gift of giving. And some of you are thankful that you don't have that because it's easy for them to give. And most people that have the spiritual gift of giving, they don't even see radical giving as a chore. It's not something that they're actually being sacrificial. It's just how they're wired. Right? And so that's an actual gift. Just because you're not gifted, it doesn't mean you can't grow into it, but there are people that are actually wired to give financially. And so we said, okay, the goal of this series isn't to come down to a dollar amount and hey, you have to give this amount of money at a rookie level or this amount of money at a reoccurring level or this amount of money. The goal of this series is to challenge each of us to do an inventory of where we are in this spectrum and to say, okay, by the end of this series, going into 2019, would you be willing to take one step of faith, one step of trust, one step of saying, okay, God, I'm going to give you a little bit more of my heart. And by giving you a little bit more of my heart, I'm going to trust you in a new way, and I'm going to give you a little bit more of my generosity. What does that look like for each of us? What does it look like for us to honor God? There's a progression to our generosity. And here's what I love about our church. We're all at different places in our relationship with God, which means that we're all at different places of giving. But what I love about this place is I love that we're all in different places, but we all trust God to meet us right where we're at. And so even if you're not a Christian, if you don't follow Jesus, even if you don't necessarily believe everything in the Bible, here's what I probably know to be true about you, because you're here. You believe that this place, the church, has the potential to do good in this world. And so I have no reservation about asking you, no matter where you are spiritually, to consider finding yourself on this continuum, because even if you're not a follower of Jesus, your giving will help other people in this world. Right? We're going to talk about this next week, but we're going to have 3 directors of some nonprofits that we're partnering with here next week to talk about their ministry. And we're doing some work with Dayspring Homeless Women's Shelter. We're doing some work, as Lauren mentioned, with Urban Acts Academy, which is a school down in inner city Indianapolis. We're doing some work with Youth for Christ. And so even if you're not a follower of Jesus, I think you want to do good in our city, right? I think you want to see our city in a better place. And so I have no reservation saying, hey, if we come together and we decide to honor God with our finances, it's going to make our community better. And here's what I've learned over the last 20 years of trying to live this out, is that God is worthy of honor, not for what he does, but for who he is. God is worthy of honor, not only for what he does, but also for who he is. And I think what happens, or what can happen in our relationship with God, is we can get into this mode where God becomes more like a vending machine. He's like this cosmic vending machine where we go to him and we're like, okay, E9, all right? And this is what I need right here in this moment. And so I need, God, I need you to show up in this relationship. And I need you to show up, or, B6, I need you to show up in my job. And so we go to God, not necessarily for who he is. We go to him with our needs. And that's fine. God can handle our needs. God longs to meet our needs. God longs to come and meet us in our life when we have needs. But that's not the only reason that God deserves honor. That's not the only reason that God deserves respect. God deserves honor and is worthy of honor for who he is. I love this passage in Revelation chapter 4. He says, this is John writing this. He says, "You are worthy, O Lord, our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and they have their being. What's he saying there? He's saying, hey, you know what? You spoke everything into existence. None of us can do that. There's another translation that says, and you hold all things together. That have their being phrase is you sustain all things. The very life that we have is sustained. It's kept together by God. Every single moment of every single day. The axis that the earth rotates on, the solar system that we're a part of, like all of those things are held together by the power and the will of God. And so for that very essence, because of his character and because of his power and because of his will, before he ever gives us anything, he has provided us with life. He has provided us with sustainability. He's provided us with an opportunity to experience his presence. And because of that, he is worthy of honor. And so as we close today, I just want to walk through 3 ways that our generosity, as you and I choose to be generous, how it can honor God and how it can bring respect and high esteem to God. And the first way is this, that when you choose to be generous, our generosity, it honors God's provision. Provision just means providing, that God provides. Look at this passage of scripture that in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8. This is Moses writing. He says, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. I love this because so often what we think is, the church is all about God providing us with money. It's not what he's saying. God doesn't just provide your money. He provides you with the ability to make money. He provides you with the know-how. And so here's what happens in my life, maybe in your life. We can get to this place where we start to believe that we are the provider of our resources. And if you think that you're responsible for your provision, giving will not feel honoring to you. Giving will not feel like an opportunity to you. You know what giving will feel like to you? A tax. You'll feel like God is demanding something of you. I see this with my little kids. We will go to McDonald's or we'll go to Chick-fil-A and I'll get them a full Happy Meal, right? I'll get them an entire Chick-fil-A kids meal, which is like right next to heaven, right? It's just like, Chick-fil-A is just amazing. And I'll say to them, hey, give me one of your fries. And they act like they harvested the potatoes and they cut them and they cooked them and they provided them. Like, don't touch my fries. I'm like, do you not know I just bought you those fries, right? And so there's this belief in their mind that I did not provide that. All I'm asking for them is punishment to give me a fry. I'm like, do you know how many fries I can buy for myself? I'm just asking you for one. Look at all I just bought you. I got you a toy. I got you an ice cream. I got you 6 nuggets and not just 4, okay? Like, there's abundance there, right? Give me one fry. But if they believe that I don't deserve it because somehow they provided it or they deserve it, it changes the whole dynamic. And I think we get in the same mode with God. When you believe that, you know what, it's me that's making these strategic decisions that's work. It's me that's grown my business. It's me that's working hard. It's me that got my degree. It's my hard work. It's my business acumen. It's my intelligence that is providing. It's my ability to make money or close deals or do sales. When you start thinking that you're in control of your provision, giving will not feel honoring. You'll feel like God is asking something of you that he does not deserve. And I love why this is just a reminder that, you know what? Every single aspect of your life is provided by God. Not just your money, but the abilities that you have in this world are given to you by him and for him. And he's not asking for everything. He's asking of a portion of what you get, what you have to give back to him that will bring honor to him. Even my ability to make money is given to me by God. Secondly, generosity honors God's purpose. Not only does it honor God's provision, but it honors God's purpose. Look at this passage of scripture in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Paul's talking here and he says, all of this is a gift from God. So there's that same mindset. We're not owed anything. You don't deserve anything. Like, the very life that you have is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. This verse is so rich. If you want to really know the essence of the entire Bible in like one little passage, it's right here. And God has given us the task of reconciling people to himself. Verse 19, for God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message. Another translation says this wonderful task or this wonderful assignment of reconciliation. And so this right here outlines God's purpose and God's plan for this world. There are really 3 chapters to the story of God. There's the creation chapter, right, where God creates the world in Genesis chapter 2. And after every single thing he creates, he says, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. He gets to man, he's like, it's not good for man to be alone. It wasn't a mistake, it was just, he was just gonna like double down on it. It was just gonna make it better, right? So he creates woman. Right? And he says to Adam and Eve, he's like, hey, you know what? The whole place is yours. I've created basically paradise for you. It's perfect. There's no flaws. You get to walk in community with me. You get to be naked, all right, and not feel any shame, which is amazing, all right? No, you don't have to wear any clothes. Just don't do one thing. Don't eat from the tree that's in the center of the garden. You can have anything else. You can eat anywhere else. You can eat as much as you want. Just stay away from that one tree. And that's the creation story. That was God's preferred plan for mankind. Up until that point, there was no death. God was going to live with us, and we were going to live with him in perfect community. And then Adam and Eve make a decision, right? Make a decision that they believe that God is holding out on them. There's this belief in their heart. God says, hey, don't eat from this tree, and Satan comes and starts speaking a distorted truth to Eve, and he says, hey, did God really say that you shouldn't eat from that tree? Did God really say if you eat it, you're going to die? And inside Eve's mind, there was this doubt that began to creep in where she started to believe, you know what? God is holding out on me. God is holding me back. God is keeping something from me. Why shouldn't I be able to eat from that tree? I know I have everything else, but come on. God is such a killjoy. God is holding me back. I should be able to eat from that tree too. Satan doesn't take the fruit off the tree and shove it into her mouth. He just poses this question that gets her to start doubting God. And you know the story. She chooses to eat, and she gives some to Adam, and he eats. And in that moment, the perfect community and the perfect harmony that we were experiencing with God was broken. And it's easy to blame Adam and Eve, but you and I would have done the same thing. If you don't believe me, just live 24 hours. You make mistakes every day, right? You mess up every day. You fall short of what God says every day. I read this stat this week that said the average person hears 200 lies in a 1-hour conversation. First thought was, who has 1-hour conversations anymore? That was my first thought. But the average person tells 6 lies in a 10-minute conversation. It's crazy, right? And they're probably not like these jaw-dropping lies. They're probably just these little half-truths, these little twisting of the truth that make us look better than what we really are. And so we would have made the same mistake. So we have the creation chapter, and we have the brokenness chapter, right? And mankind lived in this state of brokenness until what Paul says, that God began to reconcile and redeem everything through Jesus. And not only did God redeem everything through Jesus in the New Testament, then God has given us the purpose of reconciliation. That's God's purpose for your life. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what your gender is, what your age is, what your race is, what your socioeconomic status is. If you are breathing, then your purpose is outlined in 2 Corinthians right there. It says your purpose is to help redeem, help reconcile this broken world back to God. If you're a follower of Jesus, that is your life purpose. That you and I are to partner with God to help this broken world find redemption in him. He's given us this wonderful message of reconciliation. What's that message? I was far from God, and he brought me back to himself. And God wants to bring this broken world back to himself. That's our purpose. That's our mission. And so when you are generous, you're not just giving to the church. We talked about this last week, right? You're giving through the church. You're giving to God's purpose through the church. That's what we're doing together. We're not just sitting here singing songs, facing forward, getting new information about God every single week. We're on a mission together to help reconcile this city and this world back to God. That's what we're doing. And it matters. It matters every single week. 13 years ago, this season, October, November, December, 13 years ago, my wife and I were separated. 2.5 months we were separated. We didn't talk for the first 10 days of our separation. And I started going to counseling by myself before Trish was willing to go with me. And then we started going to counseling together. And as we started going to counseling together, we made this decision that we weren't going to go to church together. We were going to meet each other at church. And so we showed up at Grace, not together, but separately, and we sat together. And can I just tell you, we were hanging on by a thread. I mean, it was fragile. It was not just day by day, it was like minute by minute of whether or not our marriage was going to make it. And so as we showed up to church, I was not a professional Christian. I was a broken person in need of hope, and I felt hopeless. And I felt like I had wounded God, and I had wounded every single friend that I had. And I'll never forget the first week at being at Grace, we sang a song called I Am a Friend of God. And the lyrics of the song say, I am a friend of God, he calls me friend. I didn't feel like a friend of God. That song spoke life and hope into my soul. We were so hurt and so broken and so sad and so hopeless. And we sang this song that said, I'm trading my sorrows. I'm trading my shame. I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. Lyrics that don't really mean a lot when I say them out loud, but can I tell you in that moment, they were everything. There was this ministry of reconciliation that was going on where God was bringing me back to him. God was bringing us back to each other through these lyrics that we were singing in this environment that was filled with his Spirit. Second or third week that we went there, we sang this song that just really, I almost couldn't stand up and sing it. It's an old hymn that was redone by a guy named Christian Stanfill. And it's a song called Jesus Paid It All. And it starts out kind of very, it sounds like a hymn, and then he adds this bridge. And he says, oh, praise the one who paid my debt and brought this life back from the dead. And it was just this moment of clarity that God brings dead things back to life. It was just this reminder. And can I just tell you, every single week, you don't know the people that walk in here. You don't know the burdens that they carry. You don't know how many people are giving God one last shot. You don't know how many people are giving faith one last shot. You don't know how many people are giving their marriage one last shot. You don't know what hangs in the balance on the other side of your generosity. To provide a space like this where people can find hope and follow God, it's not just a weekly mission, it's an eternal mission. And we may never know on this side of heaven how people have left here and experienced God's presence. Can I just tell you though, it matters, and it's God's purpose. And we get to partner with that. We get to be a part of that. And finally, our generosity, it honors God's priorities. It honors God's priorities. Look at this verse. I mentioned it earlier. Proverbs chapter 3. The writer of Proverbs says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Now, I want to stop there because it's not something we really say today, right? This is a farming society, okay? And so there's this agricultural aspect to their life. This would be a statement that all of them would have understood. But basically, we know, like we left on vacation this last week, and we came back, and we were driving home yesterday afternoon, and all of the cornfields around our house have been completely harvested. And so, sometime in the last 5 days, the farmers just knocked it out. They were all up before we left, and now they're all down. And I even said to Trish, I'm like, all the corn's gone. Well, in this society, they didn't have combines, they didn't have tractors, they didn't have trucks, they didn't have machinery. And so they would harvest their crops in stages. They would harvest their crops at the pace that they could. And there was no guarantee that when they started and by the time they ended, that what was at the end was going to be worth anything. Because it may have taken a month, it may have taken 2 months. Who knows how long it would take to harvest all of the crops. And so what God's saying here is, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruit. So the very first harvest that you make, bring that to God. And this is a trust thing. This is this society saying, okay, I'm going to bring God the first fruits, the very best of my crop, and I'm going to trust that there's going to be something left over at the end. The order is very important to God. And I would say this to you, the order in which we give is more important than the amount we give. Because God is saying, hey, I want you to trust me. I want you to grow in my priorities. And my priority is that you honor me first and then trust me to provide for you later. And when we add up all that we have and we add up all that we owe and then we just give God whatever is left over at the bottom, that is not a demonstration of trust. You know, it's a demonstration of trust in ourselves. But when you give God first out of the first and not necessarily out of the overflow, what you're saying is, okay, I don't know how all this is going to be reconciled, but I'm going to give. And I'm going to be generous. I'm going to trust that God's priorities matter in my life. And then God says, and your barns will be filled with overflowing and your vats will brim over with new wine. And what he's talking about there is not necessarily that you're just going to, win the, 999 billion or million or 1 billion or whatever it is now. He's not guaranteeing you a lottery, windfall. What he's saying is your life is going to begin to be defined by your trust in me, and I'm going to provide for you. And I'm never going to let you down. As we got to, many of you guys know we spent this last week in Florida on vacation. And Trish took this picture, I think our second or third day there, of Janiyah on the beach. It's just this amazing moment. And we were going for a walk the next day, and the kids were walking in front of us, and I brought up this picture, and we adopted them. The adoption was final a year ago, November 4th. It's coming November, it'll be a year. And I just said to Trish, I'm like, can you imagine her life without us? And Trish said, I can't imagine our life without them. And quite honestly, we have been elevated or complimented or looked at as generous for being willing to adopt these kids, but it was just the next yes for us. I didn't even feel like it was radical. I just felt like it was relational. I've seen God show up and ask me to give when it didn't make sense. I told you stories last week of when we gave and we couldn't afford to give and God provided. And so giving to them and providing a home for them, it wasn't really even a radical step. It was just something we felt like God doing, and we said, okay, we'll do that. We've seen you show up before. We'll do this again. We didn't have, our income didn't increase, right? The square footage of our house didn't increase. Like there wasn't any guarantees. They're both in counseling for trauma. She's been in 3 foster homes and at least 3 safe families. Jalen's been in 9 foster homes and at least 3 or 4 safe families. There's baggage that comes with it, but I have no idea what her life or our life would look like without it. Like, we have no idea what's connected to our generosity. What is the soul of one person worth? Right? And you and I have the opportunity to honor God with our priorities and say, okay, God, we're going to give to you, not out of just this leftover mindset where we just, leftovers isn't what you serve your guests, right? You don't just break out, your Buffalo Wild Wings leftovers from last Tuesday when a guest comes over, right? No, when a guest comes over for dinner, you cook for them. You break out the good silverware and the good, plates, and you sit around the table and you serve them good food. And God's saying, hey, would you treat me in the same way? Would you just honor my priorities? And so next Sunday, we've invited the director of Youth for Christ, we've invited the director of Urban Acts Academy, and we've invited the director of the women's shelter, Dayspring Women's Shelter, to come and speak. And it's not lost on me as I look at this picture that when we served Dayspring in July, Janiyah said, I used to stay here with my mom. I think I've stayed here with my mom. And one act of generosity can change everything. And so here's what we're going to do. I don't have my phone, but I want you to take out your phone. And we're going to do something together, because here's the last point of my message. Generosity allows us to do more together than we ever could apart. And so we're going to institute what we're calling the Dollar Club. And so no matter if you've ever given to Hope City, I want you to give $1. If you've never given to Hope City, I want you to give $1. So if you take out your phone and you go to the Hope City app, or you go to hopecityindy.cc, I want you you can select the Dollar Club on there, on the giving app. And if you can give more than $1, give more than $1. But we want to bless these 3 organizations by collectively giving to them. And so I want to encourage you, if you've never given before, become a rookie giver and give $1 today. And if you are a giver at Hope City, I want to encourage you, over and above what you give, don't Justin just asked me to give $1 on the offering today. Sweet, I got offer cheap today. All right, if you give here, go ahead and give. But over and above your giving, I want you to give $1, or if you can afford $20, give $20. Whatever that looks like. But we want to come together and we want to demonstrate what generosity looks like collectively, and then we're just going to give the amount of money that we give this week to the Dollar Club. We're going to give that to the organizations next Sunday. Just as a demonstration, just as a realization that, hey, you know what, we can do more together than we can separately. Like generosity matters. It connects to the hearts of people, and it changes people's lives. And so I hope that you leave today wrestling with not just what can I afford to give, but I really want you to wrestle with that question, what does God ask of me? What would it look like for me to honor God? And that looks different for you than it does for me, so I'm not going to impose my journey on you. That's something that if you'll seek God on that, I know he'll show up. And as we give to this Dollar Club, we'll have an opportunity to see our generosity tangibly over the next 7 days come together and we can say, hey, we believe in what you're doing, and we're going to serve you on November 3rd from 9 to noon, but we want to also provide this amount of money for you. And I think that's going to be an awesome way for us to demonstrate generosity. All right, let's pray together.